what we're looking at here is Bruno Zhang, our favorite demo patient. If you've seen any of the videos on our clinical guide, this is the patient that we use for most of our demos and things like that. So he's fairly ill. And you can see on the left-hand side that we have the GPS summary. It's our second option. We land first on the overview page, which is really a summary in another way. It's a summary of some of the data in a more structured kind of style where, you see each of the sections here that includes a subset of the clinical data. I'm going to just go ahead and click on GPS summary. It's going to bring up Bruno's summary. This is a general summary of Bruno's clinical data. So Bruno so happens to also have COPD as the patient that Jeff was telling us about. So we get a summary of that right up top because it's his most critical chronic condition. And then we run through some other conditions and information about each of those. And then at the bottom, you can see there's usually some information about recent social history changes. You can see that he had an acute condition. He had strep throat and was hospitalized for that. And Jeff and Mark were both also mentioning the citations, which are important to their team. And you can see those throughout here. You can see the same citation a few times because that's a document. And so one of the really cool things about the summary is that we're able to take the structured data that I was showing on the overview earlier, and you can see is on the left-hand side here. But then we can also summarize the unstructured data. And that's really where there are these like valuable gold nuggets of information that are super hard to get at in a structured way. And so if I wanted to look at this hyperlipidemia diagnosis, for example, you can see the citation here and I can click it and I can read this document. So in the sample, the document's not very pretty, but you can imagine, and I'm sure all of you have seen before, these huge, dense documents that contain a lot of information. And so we're really excited about our ability to sort of pull out that value and get to it right in the moment. One thing we are working on is that the citation will actually bring you right to the relevant section of the document. So obviously I'll click it again here. We open the document up and you're just kind of landed in the document, which is useful. But one of the things that we're actually currently working on is the ability for that link to bring you right to the text that we're summarizing from. So it's going to get you to that clinical context even more quickly. Some other things that were mentioned that I'll just highlight is you can see the sort of thumbs up, thumbs down rating. Jeff and Mark are right, that comes right to me and some of my colleagues, and we read through those things, and it is incredibly valuable to us to hear both to give us feedback on the summary itself, like the content of the summary, but it's also given us really interesting insight into how folks are using it, like in their workflow and things like that. And that's been incredibly valuable. Just briefly, I'll touch on the structured data on the left. So again, this is the same data that we were looking at on the overview page. If you're not familiar, you can click on any of these items and it brings up a card on the right-hand side here. So this gives you the ability to really deeply dive into the structured data alongside the summarized data. And Lauren was mentioning is we've been experimenting with what we're calling a focused summary. So this general summary is useful, but we've heard tons of feedback that it would be really useful to sort of ask for certain things or to have summaries more focused to a follow-up visit, or maybe you're a cardiologist and you have really specific types of tests that you're interested in learning about. So I will preface this with, this is a new feature for us. It's not available to anybody because we're still testing it, but I did want to show kind of directionally where we're heading. So I set this up in advance. I asked for a focus summary on asthma history. So you can see that here. This is giving me a brief summary of Bruno's asthma history, but I'm going to actually do this live and I'm going to type in some things here to see if I can get other information. So let's say I want to know about his social history, if there are any imaging results, let's say recent vitals and labs maybe. And how about chronic conditions? That'll be at the bottom. You can see that we can specify the time frame here. I'm gonna hit update, and then I'm gonna click this little roundabout button to regenerate our summary. So while that's happening, basically what I'm doing is you can see I just added a comma separated list of items. The way that we're thinking about this is, a lot of folks have said, like I mentioned earlier, I'm a cardiology practice. These are the things that are important to me, this list of items. And so let's see. So it didn't find any imaging results. So it's actually sometimes really good to know when there's an absence of data. So no recent imaging results for Bruno, but does list some of his recent vitals and labs, kind of lists out the chronic conditions as we saw in the previous one. Oh, and I missed the very top one, that patient. So Bruno never smoked, and it reports that his alcohol use is a no. So you can see that we got a little bit of a brief summary of the social history and the other things I typed in there. So again, pretty early days here, but directionally, the way that we're thinking about this is perhaps, you'll send us your intake form, the things that you fill out or you ask the patient to fill out, and we'll be able to summarize that. What Mark mentioned, the kind of follow-up visit piece, we've heard that too. And then there are lots of other ways we're thinking about this, potentially, focusing on specific conditions, things like that. So it is a little tricky to know where to focus here because it seems like there's infinite potential. So we're starting general and sort of narrowing from there. I also really love the idea of it being different users, right? So different folks need access to different information. You're sort of, everybody's looking at the patient from a different angle, if you will. So that's another direction we've thought about heading with the focused summary. That's the kind of brief demo of the GPS.